It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonah Schaefer, and we're going to be joined by a special guest here on this Friday in late April, Ken McKusick, to discuss the best prospects for the Ravens on the defensive side of the football with the 27th overall pick. We're going to break down everybody who could fall to the Ravens, maybe some guys that they could trade up for, and then some guys on day 2 and day 3 potentially. Just throw out some names that we could keep an eye on. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsors.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, we are less than a week away from the start of the NFL draft, and that's why our word of the day, Jonas, is mock. Definition of relating to or having the character of an imitation, simulated, feigned, first known usage, 15th century. And our Who's Got It Better Then goes to mock drafters in general, because this is their time to shine. This is when their pages get the most views. This is when we examine who the Ravens might draft, and that's why we have Ken McKusick here. You know him as Film Study on Twitter. He is at Film Study Ravens, filmstudybaltimore.com. He is the guy when you're talking about studying Ravens film. Ken, thanks so much for hopping on the Banner Ravens podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So we're going to break down some of the top defensive prospects in this draft and guys that the Ravens could draft. But first of all, I mean, you watch Ravens film more than just about anybody, and you've been breaking down the film of this past year. When you talk about Zach Gore and this defense in particular, taking over, he had big shoes to fill for Mike Macdonald, taking over as the defensive coordinator at age 31, 32 years old. And we saw his defense evolve over the course of the season. Obviously, a lot of the defense will have to do with the personnel and the kind of guys that they bring in from the draft from now until the start of the season. But how do you see this defense evolving in the second year under Zach Gore?
Yeah, well, tremendous evolution just in season during the first year. It's very unusual. Reminds me a little bit of the 2019 Ravens, how they turned the team around with an in-season acquisition of 2 inside linebackers in Fort and Bynes. Jihad Ward was a undervalued addition. They traded Kenny Young and they picked up Marcus Peters. Just a whole set of changes made on an as necessary basis. And they did the same thing again in 2024. Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson are gone. I think the Ravens probably will be looking free safety as one of their highest, most necessary skill sets to not only fill out the safety room, which is very short on back end players, but also to give the option to move Hamilton up closer to the line of scrimmage again. So a lot of interesting developments. I thought Orr was a very different coordinator from Macdonald in terms of a lot of characteristics of the defense that showed up. And I thought it's always very fun to watch that. It's like opening Christmas presents to see who your defensive coordinator is going to be come week 1 of his first year.
Yeah, and as we turn our attention now to the draft, you've got a lot of guys who could help this defense right away. And last week we talked about, Jonas and I discussed some of the offensive prospects who could be available. And Ravens have 11 picks. They're going to take some guys on offense. They're going to take some guys on defense. They might take 1 or 2 on special teams, wink, wink, a kicker. But we are going to discuss the defensive side of the football today, because from everything that we've kind of gleaned from what we've heard from Eric DeCosta, from John Harbaugh, it seems like the Ravens are probably leaning towards defense with the number 27 overall pick. You don't rule anything out. But of course, there are a lot of good defensive prospects that could be available right around the 27th overall pick. So let's start with some potential guys that could potentially fall to 27, but might require a trade up if the Ravens were to go and get them. They're obviously not going to get Abdul Carter. They're not going to get Jalen Walker, Michael Williams, most likely, but some guys that have a chance to be within range of that 27th overall pick. Jonas, why don't we start with Texas A&M's Tremar Stewart? He's ranked by Daniel Jeremiah as the number 27 overall prospect. And this guy is kind of a test case of production versus high upside.
Yeah, I mean, it's traits versus track record. I think the thing that you hear from these draft analysts is that you care more about what is projectable to the NFL than what was done in college. But at a certain point, you can't ignore, in this case, what is like a glaring lack of production. I mean, 4.5 sacks in 3 seasons, no more than 1.5 sacks in each of those seasons. He's kind of oblivious in run defense. He didn't do a lot of testing, which to me indicates that even though he is explosive, there's not a whole lot of, agility there to get where he needs to. You need that ankle flexion. You need that stop-start ability to be able to kind of mess with offensive tackles and their pass sets. So just watching him, like, the flashes are so intriguing because, with his speed to power, it could be enough to completely, overcompensate for what he doesn't have. But again, you turn on the tape and then you just are begging for a little bit more. Like, he's a good run defender, even if he can still be oblivious to certain things at certain points. But he just has like a rip move. He has a speed to power that's really not all that effective because he's not great at coming off the ball. So he would be the ultimate kind of like test case for the infrastructure that the Ravens have in place, not just with Zach Orr, but with Chuck Smith. Like, if Chuck Smith gets his hands on this guy, maybe that's a project that you're willing to invest in. But the leap from barely tolerable level of production at A&M to being able to hack it as a 5 to 10 sack guy in the AFC North is so big. And it's going to be really interesting to see like what the Ravens do if he's still on the board and they are on the clock at number 27.
Yeah. Ken, where do you come down on this?
Very opposed to drafting Shamar Stewart at 27. I think that you hit on some of the reasons, but just to give a little more detail on this, his pass rush productivity last year was in the 70th percentile, which is perfectly fine, but his finish rate was in the 5th percentile, which is not acceptable. And there are a lot of guys, by the way, who you get pressure, but you don't get great finishes. And I'm okay with first pressure guys, but at some point you got to have some finishes that go in with what you do. So if that were the only problem, I could probably live with it. He's one of the worst tacklers of any of the draftable edge players with a 26.9% missed tackle rate for his career. I look at stops to missed tackle, in particular at inside linebacker. That's like the strikeout to walk ratio for inside linebackers for me. But at edge, it's also important. He only had 28 stops and 18 missed tackles, which is an awful 1.6 to 1 relationship. Normally, I would expect that to be about 4 to 1 for an average edge player, and better for the really good ones who are exceptionally technically sound. He's got 0 career coverage snaps. That's also an indication that he will take pass rush flexibility away from the team that he has. And I want to say something about his hand usage too, because the guy has 34 and 1/8-inch arms. He should be dominating most offensive tackles, who even most tackles are shorter than that. That's ideal NFL length for a left tackle arms, about 34 inches. He uses his arms like windshield wipers to keep himself clean rather than dictating for his contact and going to the body and making the preemptive strike that would help him dominate play after play. So that's a really big problem. It's not like the guy has no value. And Jonas, I'm thinking the same thing as you do, that I'd really love to see what Chuck Smith could do with this guy. But there is so much of a fundamental rebuild from the ground up. This is a major project. So I'd be okay with him at 59. I'm not okay with him at 27. He won't last to 59, which means somebody else wants him more. I also think he's a better fit for a 4-3 scheme.
Yeah, and Paul, if I can hop in there before you move on to the next one. I forgot to mention I have silly comps for a lot of these prospects.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul, I know you're used to my foolishness, and Ken, if you can kind of humor me, but watching him, it was my comp for him is like it's a tennis pro playing pickleball and like not dominating. It's like you have everything that you need to dominate these inferior athletic specimens. Why can't you? My more off the wall comparison was the somewhat recent movie Jungle Cruise, which had like tens of millions of dollars in these very famous actors, and it was just an absolute piece of crap as a movie. I never saw it, but according to Rotten Tomatoes, it's like one of the biggest box office flops. So just because you have everything just because you look like you're built in a lab to play football doesn't necessarily mean that you should be expected to play football at a high level. We should also mention that he did lose some weight when he went down to the Senior Bowl. He was close to unblockable there. So I don't know if that means he's going to be faster in the NFL, but less powerful, or maybe he is faster and still has the same amount of power. But it's going to be interesting to see if whichever team drafts him, I'm sure they had reps at the Senior Bowl, whether they point to that as like a turning point where it's like, all right, you get him away from A&M, you get him to the playing weight that you more expect him to play at the NFL. And we believe in that version of Shamar Stewart compared to the one that we saw on tape in 2024.
Yeah, and lack of production by itself obviously hasn't scared the Ravens away. Odafe Oweh is, of course, the poster child of a guy who didn't have a whole lot of college production, but that didn't scare the Ravens away from drafting him with the 27th overall pick. But as you said, Ken, there's a lot more reasons why there was a lack of production from Shamar Stewart that should kind of scare people. Another draft prospect who has a lot more production from the edge position, Tennessee's James Pierce Jr. last year with Tennessee in his senior season, 7.5 sacks, 10 sacks in 2023. Let's start with Jonas. What do you like about James Pierce Jr.?
Speed. My comp for him, I don't know if you guys remember watching like ESPN2 back in the day, but remember when it would be like a Wednesday afternoon and or a Saturday afternoon, and they would have drag races on, and you just have those very linear dragsters just like tearing up the track. That is him. That is James Pierce to me, because he is so fast, but also if you remember watching those drag races, like when it goes bad, it goes really bad. And you see these 200 mile per hour projectiles just veering into walls, and you kind of fear for their safety. And it's very easy for things to go poorly for him. I know he has this pass rush production, and it's very easy to kind of fall in love with the traits, but it doesn't really seem like he knows how to play football. Like he just has one move, which is just, I'm going to try you with my speed rush. I'm going to try to get you to kind of bend at the waist because of how fast I am. And if that doesn't work, then I don't really have a clue. You turn on the tape of him against Ohio State. That was Donovan Jackson a lot of the time that he's going against a converted left guard to left tackle, and he just had no clue how to beat him. And Tennessee didn't want to line him up as a strong side guy. Like they would wait until the offense sets formation before they figured out where they would move him, which tells you just how they felt about his run defense or his willingness to take on tight ends. And you put all that with kind of whispers about his character concerns and his willingness to practice, and it doesn't really scream plays like a Raven. But again, he was supposed to be like a top 5 pick entering this year. His draft stock tumbled a little bit because he wasn't as productive, or he didn't really build on what he showed in 2023. So for me, it's a situation where you let someone else take him off your hands, but maybe if the Ravens don't have any other options at 27, they like what Chuck Smith could do with him there.
All right, I'll respond to that. I'll say he's one of the players I really love at 27. I really love him for the Ravens. and there's a lot. So we'll have some difference of opinion, I hope, as we go through this. But the top pass rush productivity in the entire nation. And it's all based on get off. You're absolutely correct. I mean, he only tries to beat people outside, which means he would benefit probably from Chuck Smith more than anybody else in terms of developing that spin move, Euro step, whatever it might be, to beat the guy back inside. Because his outside move, I mean, the thing they always say about offensive tackles, and correctly so, is that they overcommit to the first move of a defender when they're even a little slow. And then that opens them up to be beaten to the opposite side by any kind of counter. So I think that's all Pierce really needs to take his pass rushing to potentially a ceilingless situation. Is he needs to be a guy who learns that effective counter. And it's unlike the guy we just talked about, Shamar Stewart, who's a complete rebuild at multiple levels. I think that's the one thing Pierce needs to be an effective starter as a situational pass rusher. His run defense is okay. He's got a 4.0. Stops him his tackle ratio, which is fine. What did he do? He didn't finish great as a finisher. He's a 12th percentile finisher, but I'm okay with that when his pressure rate is at the very top of the class. And I think he'd get better, in particular with a Ravens interior that I think will create opportunities for him to finish more as the second man in. So I loved a lot about him. And on draft night, we always look at who are the players we really love and we want to draft. Pierce is going to be one of the guys I'm going to be damn it, he's off the board kind of thing whenever he goes, if it's 16, 17, 18, along with a few others I think we're still going to talk about today.
Yeah, around this time.
If you
Go ahead,
project him as the guy as the looper on pass rush games, and just there's like a rep against Oklahoma where he's starting off as the wide 9, so basically a gap over from the tackle, and they ask him to loop to the opposite side of the center, and he does it in a flash. And there aren't a lot of guys who can move with that kind of velocity. But again, there were dudes on that Tennessee defensive line, like Omar Norman Lott is a potential day 2, day 3 pick for the Ravens. And still there wasn't a whole lot of, there wasn't a lot of synergy there in terms of what Tennessee was doing. And maybe that's another coaching staff problem, but it's just it's going to be interesting to see where he lands and kind of how he fits.
Yeah, and around this time last year, he was kind of being viewed as like a potential top 5 pick because he was coming off that 10-sack season. And I like the already difference of opinion on some of these prospects. A guy that has been connected to the Ravens in plenty of mock drafts so far. Boston College's Donovan Ezeiruaku. Daniel Jeremiah's number 25 prospect. He's strong, he's bendy, he's fast, he's athletic. Jonas, what is there to like and what is there to not like about Donovan Ezeiruaku?
There's a lot to like. There's not a lot to dislike. My comp for him is your favorite Eastern European basketball prospect, because he has all the moves, but he doesn't really have all the athleticism. He has, just looking at my notes, he has a cross chop. That's probably his most effective move. You see him 2-hand swipe. He has inside out moves. He has ghost moves. He has every kind of tool in the bag. What he doesn't have, though, is elite athleticism. If he did, he would be a top 10 pick. His get off is fine. It's not great. He doesn't have great speed to power. You do have some hope, though. And Ken, I think I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Just listening to Daniel Jeremiah on Ryan Russillo's podcast last night, he talked about how maybe him having as many tools in his bag at this, at the college level, is a good thing. But in the NFL, you might ask him to stop being a 5-pitch pitcher and get down to 2 or 3, so that he can focus on that speed to power, so that he can focus on the ghost move, focus only on the cross chop, and not really, try not to be a jack of all trades, and instead of be a master of one. Because even though he is somewhat undersized, he has the long arms that I think would lend itself to that kind of natural leverage of having that shock when he gets into a tackle's chest and being able to have some of those bull rushes and some of those speed to power moves. But he would be a safe pick. I think he's a better run defender than his size would suggest, but he definitely doesn't have, at least to me anyway, as high a ceiling as Shamar Stewart and James Pierce, because he doesn't have a blue chip physical trait.
Okay, first of all, relating to the toolkit, I look at exceptionally well-developed toolkit as a negative relative to production. So I'd say, when somebody has that, that's not a good thing. Ezeiruaku is a terrific fundamental pass rusher, and that's why I still like him. I like him a lot more than Shamar Stewart, and he is one of the guys that I think is worthy of consideration at pick number 27. If you look at some of the games, he really humbled a guy who became, I think, undraftable as the season moved along, Darius Washington of Florida State, in their matchup. A variety of things, arm over move. He had a bunch of quarterback hits. He has terrific hand placement. He goes to the chest, and so he's the opposite of Stewart in that sense. He uses his length exceptionally well. By the way, if you're looking for hand placement in a young player, the typical thing on college things you're going to notice is you don't even notice the hand of the player who's putting it there. You notice the flailing arms of the offensive tackle who's trying to defend him, and how quickly and easily he moves right around the guy. And Ezeiruaku has a lot of that. He has a spin move that I think is a little slow. I don't think it's really an NFL spin move. So you're talking about going from 5 to 3 pitches. That'd be one of the things that he might replace it with a different counter move. So I could see that. He saved his best for last in a way, and just an incredible game versus the 2 Pitt offensive tackles, put them to shame in that final game. I think he's a legitimate Sam option. That's a huge thing for the Ravens. They need guys who can drop to coverage, and the only guy they have right now who does it is Van Noy. Oweh probably has the traits for it, but they just don't use him in that way. So he'd be a guy that I would hope could take on Sam responsibilities. Certainly, he's learned all these other things so well. I think that's a realistic hope. And he's averaged 63.8 snaps per game. So that's a guy who you can depend on for durability. And the Ravens will back him off that. But it's still at a 50 snap per game guy. He could be very valuable.
Yeah, and if you want to fall in love with Donovan Ezeiruaku, I would encourage you to watch that Pitt game.
Yeah.
If you want to fall a little bit out of love with him, look at the PFF score of the right tackle that he was whipping up against, because that guy, it was not just that game. I think he allowed like 7 pressures to Virginia, 8 pressures to Louisville. So
Ryan Baer and Isaiah Montgomery
close
for the 2 tackles.
Yeah, not anywhere close to NFL level talent. And I would encourage people not to overdo it when you just look at that game, because it is extremely impressive, but it's also not representative of what he would even face like in the undrafted free agents that the Ravens might bring in.
Yeah, we have an honorable mention in this category as well, but let's jump to the defensive line before we, at the end, wrap up with our honorable mentions at each category. On the defensive line, let's talk about Ole Miss's Walter Nolan. Daniel Jeremiah's number 28 prospect. He can play inside, he can play outside. According to scouts, he kind of needs to improve his vision and awareness. But Jonas, what do you like about Walter Nolan?
He's explosive. I'll definitely give him that. He's very active. I think you put that activity with the explosiveness and the willingness to, try to use his hands. And I think someone compared him at one point to Nnamdi Madubuike, and that makes sense because you have that ability to be a really good outside zone defender. But I went into these games expecting to be impressed, and I watched Oklahoma, LSU, Georgia, even Florida last night. I just didn't see a whole lot. Like, I know he has the production that I think Ken will probably talk about, maybe glowingly, but it was a lot of scheme stuff. Like, Ole Miss is slanting their line every other play, that they're doing tackle, pass rush games every other play. So even though there are those flashes of him, getting into the backfield or shooting a gap, there are as many, if not more, of him just running himself out of the play. And that's how you end up with like these 5 to 7 yard easy runs for whoever Ole Miss was playing. So I was not really all that impressed watching him. But again, if you are betting on the traits, he's a guy who carries his like 6'3", 300-pound frame very, very well. You can tell that he is athletic. You could say that those situations where he's putting himself and his team in a bad spot could just be a coaching thing, and you take him to the NFL and you put him with the Ravens infrastructure. Again, you're buying low-ish and selling high. But watching the film, I really didn't come away thinking that this was a guy that I would be comfortable taking at number 27.
All right, again, another difference of opinion, because he's my number 2 interior defensive lineman, a pretty easy number 2, frankly. And he's got some fantastic fundamental metrics that are at the heart of this. His stops to missed tackle ratio is 16.0 to 1 last year, 14.4 career. And that number is it is either the best or the second best in the entire class. Career 4.7% missed tackle rate. He's made 72 defensive wins. So that's a ton of defensive wins, by the way. It's got an exclamation point in my notes, so I'm trying to make a point there. He's undersized a little bit to play at nose, but I think that's actually where the Ravens might try and get him to play on pass rushing situations. So on obvious passing downs or with the lead, positive game script, I think that's where they want him. He pushes right through any half man block. And that's one of the things you really notice about him as a pass rusher. That happens also as a run defender too. And if you have any sort of premature climbing off a double team, he pushes right through that half man block. And I like that. Penetrates to bifurcate the backfield on a lot of run plays. So he's an early down 3-tech guy who can complement Madubuike on that side. And so play some early down 3 with whatever hulking nose they want to bring in, probably a new guy for the new pairing, since Jones and Madubuike seem to go together, and then move over on some pass rushing downs to be a guy who comes in off the 1 to play. Hand placement can be extremely effective when he crosses the guard to go to center. And that's something you really like to see. He doesn't have tremendously long arms, but he is a guy who can go very hard into that center and create all sorts of havoc along that line that can be exploited by the over player. If they take him at 27, I think they probably believe they can mold him into an undersized nose tackle for some plays. And there is a trend towards more undersized nose play. I don't generally like it. I think you want to force the other team to commit a double team to your one tech and give yourself one-on-one matchups at the other three spots. I think that's the way the Ravens pass rush has worked. And, as much as people whine and complain about the Ravens individual difference makers, Travis Jones is the individual difference maker. He creates one-on-ones that created the Ravens schematically up to the second highest sack total in the entire NFL. And I think Walter Nolan would be similar.
All right, let's move on to Derek Harmon, who is probably my draft crush for the Ravens. Oregon defensive lineman. Daniel Jeremiah's number 23 prospect. Now he did have a shoulder injury in 2024, limited him to 7 games, but he looked super explosive. And Ken, to me, he kind of seemed like a guy that would be able to come in right away and make an impact. What do you think of Oregon's Derek Harmon?
So he's one of the players. This is good. It's great that we have such disagreement on this because you really can see both sides of this. I'm going to give you my reasons for it. I'd be really upset if he goes to the Ravens at 27. In fact, I'm going to be thrilled if he goes to the Ravens before 27. I'd be happy with him in the second round. He won't last that long unless the Ravens traded back or something to 40, and maybe he'd make sense there. Here's the big problem with Derek Harmon. The guy cannot tackle. So his stops to missed tackle ratio is awful for a defensive lineman at 2.1 to 1. And Walter Nolan is 16, and Derek Harmon is 2. In terms of this, he has a career 19.1% missed tackle rate, and he doesn't make a lot of stops because he's primarily a pass rush specialist. That he's in there. So he's played. He's only played 52% of his snaps as a pass rusher in his career. So even that, there's not a lot of excuse for him not to be making plays against the run. He has very high end half man moves. Like the rip, like the swim. He's not just a bull rusher. You don't always get that for an interior defensive lineman, so that's a real big positive. But just that the tackling is so far down, you need to dramatically improve it to make him a first round draftable prospect.
Jonas, thoughts?
Yeah, if my comp for Walter Nolan was Ralph Wiggum being thrown through a window, my comfort for Derek Harmon is like, if you guys remember going to the boardwalk or in Amusement Park and like you get on the bumper car ride, or you go to the bumper cars and there's that one car that's either a little bit bigger or a little bit faster, and you always hope that you are the one to get it because it just makes it so much more fun if you are the one in that kind of superior vehicle. To me, that's Derek Harmon. He ran a sub 5 second 40. He's huge. I guess there's a little bit, I think, to me, a concern about his weight because he dropped from, I think, maybe like 340 to 315 when he transferred from Michigan State to Oregon. And I think then he measured in his pro day and he was like back up to 325 or 330. So they've got to figure that out. I agree with Ken that he is not a pristine run defender. I'm a little bit less worried about the missed tackles because to me that was like him putting himself in positions to make plays that were hard to make, so you are a little bit more forgiving on that. I think he can get better at like withstanding double teams. Again, that's something that I think, you're not expecting him to be an every down defender when he gets to Baltimore. So it's probably a little bit less of a concern, but I just like what he can be as a pass rusher. His hands aren't all the way there, but I think they're good enough. And you put him in pass rush games as the guy colliding or the guy looping, and he's just so hard to stop once he gets going. He is active. He chases down plays as a backside defender. He's just really, really fun to watch. And I think the fact that he, I believe, led like all interior linemen in pressures and was up there in sacks. It's not joke production, which to me the Walter Nolan production reeks a little bit of. So I think he got better over the course of the year. You watch him play against Ohio State in that college football playoff game. He's in the middle of a lot of really impressive stuff. I just think that he would be a very, very safe pick for the Ravens there, and I think he could come in and be a pretty high impact player.
Okay, part of my downgrade there is also for fit. So one of the issues is that Matabike plays every single pass rush snap. In fact, he plays probably more snaps than he should. Maybe they could cut his snap total. You've got a tremendous overlap of role for Harmon and Matabike. I think you could get them both on the field together if you're defending a lead, positive game script. You want to go to two fast interior rushers. You can certainly play that game. The Ravens did it with the race car package for years, having 4 outside linebackers on the field. But it's not obvious to me with the way they have used interior defenders in these last couple of years. You want to take Travis Jones off the field for Harmon on a third down play, which means all of a sudden you've got wasted value on the roster, kind of like the same way the Ravens have a tight end. And I like Derek Harmon as a pass rusher. Entirely like him in terms of what he can do from the 3-tech position. I just question fit.
I did misspeak. It was not Derek Harmon, but our next prospect that we're going to talk about, Maxwell Hairston, who had the shoulder injury that limited him to 7 games. Let's talk about Kentucky's Maxwell Hairston. Daniel Jeremiah's number 35 prospect. He's kind of a twitched up, lean, long cornerback. Guy who has gotten a lot of buzz for an end of the first round type prospect. Let's go to you, Jonas. What do you think of Maxwell Hairston?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge range of notes on a lot of the DBs. I try to watch at least 2 to 3 games on these guys, but again, it's not really that much fun watching film on defensive backs just because of how long these spells of inactivity are. The site that I used, Caddy's Cut Up, only had 1 game for Maxwell Hairston from this year. It was Georgia. There was also a game against Missouri last year. A little bit tough to envision what he would be in Baltimore because there's a lot of off coverage, but he gets out of his breaks really well. He lined up at deep safety a couple times. He didn't really seem to, because of that confidence in his makeup speed, didn't really worry about double moves. He didn't bite on a couple double moves because he knew that he could drive on the ball just as quickly as he could, hang with the guy as he turn that hitch or that slant into a more vertical route. So I think he would be fine. I don't think the Ravens would have a lot of interest in taking him there at the back end of the first round unless they really, really love him. Again, he's not that high on the consensus big board. So I think it's probably more likely that the next guy we talk about would be on their radar, but he would be an interesting fit just because of his speed and his production and just the size that he has.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I think Hairston is a 2nd-round pick for me too. I think that there's a lot of things you can pull positively. Most people are going to pull on that speed, but he only played 142 coverage snaps in 2024, so he was hurt. And you have to really look at his 23 season because his 24 season was terrible. He allowed 11.9 yards per target. 142 snaps, by the way, is not nothing. So I put the kind of the floor for inclusion into median characteristics as being 300. And so 142 is almost half that. And his production was definitely bad this last year. 27.3% missed tackle rate, 8.2% though career. His coverage snaps per penalty was very bad, 71 this last year. So he gets very grabby at the top of the stem. If you look at his 23 production, he allowed a 36-yard catch to Michael Smith of South Carolina. That was on a wheel route, so he allowed it really to a running back where he's just completely out of place. He allowed a 51-yard one-handed grab to Chris Bell, the longest play of the season, down the left sideline. And that was, I'm sorry, these are both in 24. That was in week 14. It was after his injury. He came back. He got twitchy, change of direction. All that's good. Good top of the stem mirror. Just gets grabby when he's beat. 2nd-round pick for me, despite the speed.
Yeah, and another cornerback Jonas just teased, who I think was viewed earlier in the process as more of a 2nd-round pick, but he's kind of creeping his way into the first round from what I've seen in terms of mocks. Ole Miss's Trey Amos, Daniel Jeremiah's number 42 prospect. He's got good size. He's got good length. What do you think, Ken, of Trey Amos's possibility of the Ravens taking him at number 27?
That would be too high. I think he's a 2nd-round pick. Also, a guy who I do like. I mean, I'd love for the Ravens to get him in round 2 at 59. I think he's in the middle of the 2nd round would be a reasonable place for him. His coverage metrics are quite good. 4.5 yards per target, which is outstanding. What else was really good? Opposition pass rating of 54.5, which is good for the draftable corners. And his coverage snaps per penalty are at 172, which is also good. They corroborate his physical gifts. His speed is a tick slow at 443, so he's not at the upper end, but he does have good length. 31 and a quarter for a corner is pretty good. And he's 6'1", 195. Good, reasonable aircraft carrier size. I think he processes pretty well. He finds the ball and attacks it at the catch point with length. He's not a guy like Brandon Stevens who's going to wait to see the catch point develop right in front of his face to try and then impede it. Good processor in general. He's one of the best press corners in the entire draft. And he's got ball skills. Rotational outside corner right away for the Ravens. I'd be thrilled to get him at 59. I wouldn't want to see him drafted at 27.
Jonas?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Brandon Stevens, because my play comp for him is Brandon Stevens, but with awareness. I think he's a really, really good. He obviously has the length. He has good speed, not great speed. And I think that's probably one of the biggest yellow flags with him. But you watch the LSU game, which obviously perennially has pretty good talent. They went after him a lot, but I think he really held up really well. I was really impressed by his awareness, by his communication and zone coverage. And then you package that with his comfort playing in press man coverage or just in press coverage in general. I think it would be very easy to project him into a Ravens type system. Paul, you mentioned just his rising stock. It seems like he is a very popular pick now for the Bills, who obviously need a cornerback even more desperately than the Ravens, even with them signing Trey White yesterday. So I think there's a possibility that, if he's on the Bills board at number 3, then he could certainly be on the Ravens radar at number 27. I think he'd be a fine pick. It wouldn't be super exciting, but I think he could come in right away and be a potential starting cornerback. My one hesitation is that, again, if you're going to play press man the way that he did, you have to have the makeup speed. I don't know if he has that. Ken mentioned the 4.43 speed there, but there were a couple times, LSU, Georgia, Florida, where he doesn't land that punch initially, and his hips are good, but not great. And that is kind of compounded by the lack of elite speed that you need to get to these receivers when they are, when they have a step or two on you vertically. So I think he would be like a kind of glove in hand fit for the Ravens. But again, I just don't know if, considering their need for edge rusher and pass rush production in general, he would make more sense than some of the guys we've already talked about.
Yeah, let's dive into safeties now. And the two guys that have been discussed really throughout this whole pre-draft process, and they've been linked together: Georgia's Malaki Starks, South Carolina's Nick Eamon-Warry. Let's start with Malaki Starks. And let's go to Ken on the Daniel Jeremiah's number 29 prospect. What do you like about this very productive Georgia safety?
All right, let me just say, what are my thoughts? Because Starks is one of the guys I'd be happy if the Ravens got him in the second round. I'm not excited about him in the first round. There's just too much that's not right with him. And there's a lot of excuses made. Mel Kiper's making excuses about him being moved around and not being effective.
Get his ass, Ken.
Yeah. The truth of the matter is that the guy just was not particularly productive. 8.9 yards per target, a 99.6 opposition pass rating this last year. If you want to see a game where he really was taken advantage of, at the Texas game, that's really at the wrong time. He was beaten a couple of times where they just took advantage of his angles and his play on the back end. I mean, really, you'd be concerned about having that on the back end of the Ravens defense. I think doesn't have the elite ball skills of two of the other guys in the draft. Most notably Watts, who's got 13 interceptions and no touchdowns allowed the last 2 years. But also the other guy we're going to talk about, him and Warry. He's not in that same class. He's got frame limitations that limit him as a tackler potentially at the NFL level. But honestly, that's the best part of his game right now at the college level. His coverage is what really is holding him back. And he's a project to move to a full-time free safety role. There's an athlete there. I don't deny it. I'd love to have him at 59, particularly if the other two are gone, but I'm not excited to get him at 27. Jonas?
I go back to this compilation that NBC Sports or Pro Football Talk put together, where Chris Sims was asking GMs and coaches at the combine, like, what is the hardest position to evaluate? And he talked to 7 or 8 of them, and about half of them said safety or defensive back. And to me, that is just what I come down to when I'm actually watching the film for these guys, because again, even more than cornerback, it's you kind of go through 25 minutes of all 22 footage, and you'll maybe get like 5 to 8 plays where they're actually contributing in some way to what happens on the field. So I think in a case like this, even though production can tell you a lot about a player, to me, this probably is a thing where you convince a team like the Ravens of your value based on character reports, based on what you can do on a whiteboard in a pre-draft meeting, based on what you show somewhat in athletic testing. Malaki Starks didn't do especially well athletically at the combine. I think he only ran a 4.5 40. His 3-cone or short shuttle drills were not especially glowing. Even Kyle Hamilton, I know people kind of dinged him for his 40 time, but he did pretty well in the agility movements. So for me, I can rattle off plenty of stuff that I liked from what I saw in Malaki Starks' film. I think he moves. I think he's pretty good as a slot cornerback. Like if the Ravens ask him to fill that Kyle Hamilton role on occasion. I really liked what I saw in certain games there. I know he wasn't especially good in that second Texas game, I believe, but I think he did pretty well in the first Texas game. He had some issues with getting off blocks, which was a real problem for him against Alabama. But again, I think the fact that he had this, he's going to come with glowing reviews from Georgia, which obviously has done very well in preparing these guys for the next level. The fact that he was a 3-year starter for Georgia, and just the fact that he could be a guy that fits in seamlessly with his football intelligence. I know that there would be questions from people looking at certain games or certain metrics and saying this guy really is a first-round prospect. But again, it's probably a situation where the people making decisions in front offices across the country have higher opinions of him because they know what he was doing, what he wasn't asked to do, how he kind of held up his end of the bargain for this Georgia defense, which was pretty disappointing in general. So I think it would be fine for me because of everything that is around him. But I understand, Ken, that there would be some disappointment from people like you who are saying, well, this guy clearly doesn't have the productivity score of a typical first-round safety.
Yeah, and in terms of Nick Emanwari, another great athlete, he's pretty fast, 4.338 40-yard dash. He's drawn rave reviews for his athleticism. Ken, do you like Emanwari a lot better than Malaki Starks?
Night and day. So Emanwari to me,
not here.
for starters, he's the Bo Jackson of safeties. And what I mean by that is there's nobody who's brought more to the position than Emanwari is probably in all of the drafted safeties in NFL history. He's 6'3", 220, runs a 4.38 40. That's an unmatched spot on the size/speed curve. In fact, I don't know how many safeties have ever run 4.38 before, but I bet it's not more than a handful. It'd be a very, very short number. So he's often picked on for various things, like his production is not right there yet. I mean, he allowed 5.3 yards per target last year, a 37.1 opposition passer rating. He's there. I mean, the instincts are there. It's an instincts position. I think you were really getting at that more than a lot of other things with your talk about how other teams may view an individual player and knowing what his role is and whatnot. Safety, you can be slower, and it can be an instincts position. Once this guy figures out how to play free safety, where I think there's still a lot of upside, he's going to be unbelievably good. And I think he's going to stick on the back end despite his size. I think if he comes to the Ravens, the Ravens will truly have the kind of versatility you look to have at that position. Because most of the times I hear versatility, my immediate thought is they're talking about having two strong safeties. They don't really have any free safety. So they pretend that both their strong safeties could play the back end if necessary. They've got two guys who could play the back end if they have him to worry here. And adding Washington in there as a third, that's really what this team needs. And they'll get a lot more value of Hamilton closer to the line of scrimmage, who is the ultimate horizontal defender of taking away the strong side in the NFL. There's no one like him. And I hate to change him from the ace of spades into the queen of hearts by moving him back to free safety. But that's effectively what they did. Now, they were replacing a 3 of clubs back there, so they were happy to make that exchange, but they lost something from Hamilton's personal productivity. So I'd love to have Emanwari.
Jonas, do you have a crazy comp for Nick Emanwari?
My comp for him is what if DK Metcalf played safety, and that's derogatory.
Yeah.
But by the way, my comp for Malaki Starks was just like a middle upper class man's Kyle Hamilton, because I think he could do similar things, if not as with the same athletic flourishes that Kyle, just because he has this intellectual approach to the game because of what he brings off the field, all that stuff. I watched 2 games of Warrior this morning, LSU and Alabama. Unfortunately, the only 4 games available on that Caddy's Cut Up site that are available are all like sub 60 grades on PFF. So even if I watch the 2 more, I don't think that I would come away feeling like he's smelling like roses. You mentioned the athletic traits. Do you want to know someone else who ran even faster than Imanwari? Taylor Mays, 4.3, 140. And
Wow.
I think a lot of what afflicted him in his transition from USC to the NFL could also be at issue here. I don't think for the 2 games that I saw, he was particularly instinctive. It was a lot of looking around. It was a lot of false steps. There's a play where against LSU, he gets kind of caught hanging up on an RPO where he doesn't trigger fast enough to the running back because he's worried about the glance route that's kind of coming his way. The running back gets to the corner around him. And again, like if he's this athletic specimen, you would think that he would have been able to get to that. There was another play where he's like he's lined up in slot and he's communicating with the outside cornerback. And it looks like they're talking about like, all right, if it's a switch release, you get this guy, I get that guy. It seemed like it was all handled pre-snap, and then the play actually unfolds, and he is again a half step late to get to the guy that he said he would. So it's a situation where there is that linear athleticism in the same way that we were talking about with James Pierce, and maybe if you don't ask him to play as much in the box and you do have him be that free safety, then you can get more out of that A to B speed than you would where he's playing in the slot, or he's playing as a box safety, strong safety. But for me, I just didn't like the tape that I saw. There were the missed tackles in the open field. There were bad eyes. He just didn't look like a guy who had the game kind of slowing down for him. And it's possible that these early to midseason games that I watched were not representative of what he became later in the season. But based on those and based on what people have said about his hips and that kind of stuff, I would much prefer to have Malaki Starks there as the sure thing than someone who could just come to the NFL and just not have the hips or the understanding of the game to work, at least in year 1.
Okay. Well, missed tackles, his rate wasn't terrible for the year at 9.7%. It's I think there's an evaluator bias I think we all undergo this time of year, or evaluator arrogance, I'd even say, where we have an opinion about a guy, then we watch film and we want to see that be the result. And so we come up with the plays that back up that thought. And it's definitely not like Nick Imanwari doesn't have any bad plays. He's got plenty of bad plays on tape. He doesn't know how to play safety, and yet he allowed a 37.1 passer rating this last year. And that's, to me, that's a big opportunity for gain.
But if that's all, again, I didn't watch all of his interceptions, but I think he finished with 5. And
5, yeah.
I think I saw someone on Twitter say like all of them were just the quarterback throwing it right to him, just being completely dumb. I mean, like the LSU play where he has the pick 6 and runs like Nate Wiggins, kind of Terminator style up the left sideline. It was just like, you are Garrett Nussmeier. You're supposed to be a top quarterback pick. What are you doing at throwing to this guy? No one else is around you. And like, that's just kind of, for me, some of the pitfalls of relying only on a stat like, not relying only, but like pointing to a stat like passer rating without the context of how he actually made that play. And again, I could be completely wrong about the other 4 interceptions, but to me, that was just a situation where every other quarterback, every other safety in this draft could have made that interception. Probably not every one of them could have made the 100-yard sprint to the end zone that he did, but it was a little bit of a context matters kind of situation for me.
Just in terms of passer rating, the interceptions make up 1/4 of that thing. So and if you're saying the entire range, he didn't deserve any of those interceptions, I'd say crapola. So there are people. Everybody who wants to bash him and worry seems to want to say he's raw. That's a good thing. It's like having a hitter who strikes out 150 times and still hits 300. When he cuts his strikeouts to 100, he's going to be an even better player. And that's how I feel about Imanwari. The tools are all there, and the results already are corroborating those gifts It's just a matter of how much better could he get.
Can I get that evaluator's arrogance? Because I've never been wrong about a draft prospect ever in the times that I've been practicing, been studying tape. Real quick, before we get out of here, I do want to get your guys' thoughts on some honorable mentions of guys who could be available at number 27. In terms of edge rushers, you've got Marshall's Mike Green. He's kind of being viewed as maybe a top 20 pick. Very, very athletic. He's quick. He does have 2 sexual assault allegations, which he has denied. So he has some off the field stuff that he's dealing with. Along the defensive line, you've got Michigan's Kenneth Grant, who is a massive defensive tackle, 340 pounds, had 3 sacks in 12 games last year. Cornerback, you've got Jahdae Barron. You've got Chavon Ravel. Anybody in that list that you guys, let's go to you, Ken, that really sticks out to you that you would say, if he were available at number 27, you run that pick in?
I mean, Jahdae Barron is one of the best players in this entire draft. So I'm jumping all over him if he's available at 27. I'd even he'd be one of the few that would be a question along with Eamon Worry versus some pass rushers and whatnot. Michael Pierce would be one of the other ones. But yeah, I would I'd be thrilled to get Jahdae Barron there.
Jonas?
Yeah, man, I think for Paul, maybe we'll talk about it when we actually get to pick 27 on Tuesday during our mock draft. But I mean, I don't think if you are completely 110% comfortable in Mike Green and his background character, and you're willing to, endure the broadsides from strong-minded columnists like our own Kyle Goon about how could you possibly take a guy has this history of sexual assault allegations after the hot water you just found yourself in with Justin Tucker. If you are completely convicted of Mike Green as an angel, then by all means run that pick in. I think he is more athletic and, just as refined as someone like Donovan Ezeiruaku, and for me would obviously be the pick over Ezeiruaku if it came down to it. But again, that is such a fraught hypothetical. And because of the teams that need pass rush juice ahead of the Ravens, I would be very, very surprised if he's still on the board there at 27, just as I would be surprised if the Ravens traded up to go get him.
Yeah. There are a lot of guys, though, that we talked about today. I mean, I think the Ravens sit in a pretty good spot right now. I know that this draft class has been hailed as not too many stars, but a lot of starters. And where the Ravens are at number 27, we just ran through a bunch of guys that I think Ravens fans would be happy about if he were to be a Raven by the end of Thursday night. Ken, let's get a plug on where everybody can listen to and watch you, because you are Mr. Film Study and you have everything locked down on that end. So between podcasting, between Twitter, between radio appearances, where can everybody find your good work?
Well, Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. approximately, I'm on the morning show for an in-studio 30 minutes or so. So that's fun. I do. That's on 105.7. I have filmstudybaltimore.com as the website. You can get your podcast there. If you want to listen to them directly, if you're an older guy like me and doesn't download podcasts, you can click on the thing and listen to it there. But the big thing we have coming up is the live draft stream, which will be about 17 hours of continuous streaming. It's a format we really enjoy. Love to have either of you guys on. If you want to be panelists at some point, you're more than welcome to come on. But we do a interactive format where we have people in stream who are usually pretty good draft experts themselves and have their opinions. And we are constantly whittling down the big board of available players as we look at who might be drafted next.
Awesome. Well, can't wait for Thursday's draft and your coverage. Ken McKusick joining us here on the Banner Ravens podcast. And Jonas and I will be back on Tuesday with a 7-round mock draft, all 11 of the Ravens picks. We can't wait to bring that to you. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Schaefer and